So the future of Google search is fundamentally changing, and they're changing from a internet-based search engine to an AI-based search engine. Now, I've been teaching robotics and design and information literacy for over a decade now, and honestly, some of these changes have me pretty concerned. So let's fundamentally talk about what's changing. So when we look at a typical internet search, let's say you're searching for something like best headphones in 2026. If you're like me, since honestly 2020, 2021, COVID times, you've probably just ignored searching for things on these like Google, and you actually start adding in Reddit or Quora to be able to actually start finding some real answers, because you got sponsored products on the top, you have sponsored results, and then honestly, the first 5 or 6 results are even just ads anyways. So Google as a search engine itself has not been very useful. What's fundamentally changing is Google is now primarily going to transition over to what they're calling an AI mode. So rather than returning internet repository links from other websites that are backlinking out to, now you will at default get an AI search engine based results. And you'll be able to see, of course, where they're getting this information from. But what ends up happening here is that this is seen as sort of an objective truth by a lot of people, which is not necessarily the case. And one of the big things is how people go about developing knowledge, how they go about finding knowledge, and how we as a global society have gone from transitioning to when I was growing up, knowledge is difficult to find. You need to find books, you need to find experts, to the internet age where knowledge is so broadly expressed that it's difficult to sort out what knowledge it is you are looking for, to now we're going to the point where now we have so much bot engine, now these AI search engines are telling us what knowledge is that you'll be able to find. And it is moving along these lines for society as to making people kind of offload thinking and reasoning onto these AI models. And if you've interacted with people who've used too much GPT or too much Gemini or too much cloud, you can know what I mean, particularly with students, that some of them are really starting to focus on letting these AI models do the search. So in terms of what Google's actually changing, they're putting in Gemini 3.5 Flash to be able to put directly in. Now, taking off of their input-output conference, we can see that most of this is searching things right directly inside of AI mode. So it allows you to be able to do things like having search agents as well. So you could have an intelligent agent run in the background to be able to find the knowledge that you are looking for. So rather than returning a large section of links, you're now going to be interacting with Gemini to then be able to have more conversational-based things. If you want to do a full search into all of the things that are changing, you can take a look at the blog Google. I'll have that link down below. TechCrunch also has a really great overview about how these things are changing. So we're now starting to switch away from Google search and internet searches as a method for being able to find and discover knowledge and search through with your own keywords and so on, to now we have a sort of agentic AI going out and finding that information for you. And it's got a lot of pros and cons. I'm sure that, if you're like me, you may have already been using a lot of things like cloud search, ChatGPT search, Gemini to be able to do your internet research already, and then some things supplemented. You may have actually gone to an alternative search engine as well. But what are some kind of unintended consequences that we can think of when it comes to moving over to a more agentic AI search? One of the big things that I've noticed as a teacher, particularly, is that students are starting to offload a lot of their reasoning and offload these reasonings onto the AI models. And the thing about AI models and the way that these generative large language models work is they're, for the most part, a pretty large black box of thinking that come in the back. And it's not particularly clear where this knowledge base is coming from, as well as what the knowledge base is putting a bit more influence on. I'm sure you've probably noticed issues with censorship around some of these things, particularly in the United States. Now, I'm not in the United States, but if you are doing internet search from the United States or VPN, you can see that Google's already blocking searches and blocking certain websites to be able to actually get accessed in there. And that's actually a pretty big problem. About 9 months ago, there was, from Profound, you got Josh Bliskell. He noted that ChatGPT referral traffic to external websites is down 52% since about mid last year. And that's pulled from about 1 billion ChatGPT citations, over 1 million referrals from ChatGPT to figure that out. So what that basically means is that when you're doing internet searches on Google or you're doing searches on an AI model, it is not backlinking out to other websites anymore. So rather than actually going to visit the websites, instead you're getting links and summaries from these. So for instance, if you've got websites like Crutchfield or the Sound Guys or whathifi.com, these websites are no longer getting the traffic that they used to get coming from these web searches. And particularly, Google is starting to push more things like YouTube and their own particular backlinks as well. We're seeing a lot more Quora. We're seeing a lot more Reddit to be able to find these quick answers that people are looking for. So in this realm of agentic AI search and having AI models do these searches for you, what kind of sort of ramifications can go on there? So a really interesting quote here from a Reddit user. Now, again, take it with a grain of salt. One of the interesting comments they bring up is that if you're switching over to agentic AI search, a lot of Google's revenue comes from ad revenue. And when you're no longer backlinking out, you're no longer getting some of that ad revenue. This is also one of the main concerns that I particularly have with doing things like agentic AI search, and you're getting information like this. You're not quite sure where. Well, one, you kind of know where this information coming from, but it's also not necessarily true that this information is coming from these 5 or 6 websites, because it's also aggregating this information from other things that it's found online. It might not always be up to date as well. So it's also possible that you have other websites that are creating paid advertisements going into saying that the Sony WH-1000 XMX6 is the best headphone, and it's being able to, and they're flooding the internet with a lot of different search engine optimization articles that are then able to advertise that to you. Or you even have things like embedded advertisements inside of these things with ads. So that's a great question to think, is how is Google actually paying for a lot of this? Another aspect, something I alluded to earlier, this user talks a lot about, we have this time from in that internet age between the kind of mid 2010s to early 2020, you start going where you have so much knowledge, you can find anything you're looking for on YouTube. You have people who are building entire houses on YouTube and learning how to do these things. Online sources. For instance, I even learned how to make rings using some lost wax casting, finding some random online sources. And then now we're transitioning to, well, this is what AI companies are telling you is going to be where that knowledge is. And particularly lacking that ability to have that information literacy and letting AIs do that reasoning for you is a really big model. I'm sure we've all found with sycophantic models, models that are always trying to please you and say that you're right, it's really easy to go down a rabbit hole down some of these models as well, and to know what kind of worldview or what kind of frame are people going in here. And it's almost impossible to have an objective an objectively unbiased AI model and tool. So it really does bring to that concern of where are some of these sources coming from. If you'd like to get a little more research onto how Google search has changed fundamentally, starting from about 2019 onwards, there's a great article here from Ed Citron who goes through and talks about how the VP of head of search at Google changed in about 2019, and then how it's gotten to where it is now. So going back to what this user had said earlier, one of the bigger things down, particularly at the bottom half, is that you have internet searches, and these AI models rely on other people to be able to create content that they can then scrape and then be able to embed into their AI models. But without getting backlinks and things into these other people's websites who are developing this knowledge, you end up starting to run into a bit of a brain drain or a knowledge drain, where you have less people being able to create content online, and such, you have less quality content be able to go up online as well. I'm sure you've probably noticed myself, you used to have particular news sources that you used to hunt for, and now instead you're going to individual news journalists is probably more accurate to go for. For instance, I follow a couple of journalists on Substack because I trust where their opinions are coming from. But again, a lot of these things are starting to go behind paywalls. So as time goes forward, one concern I have is that these AI models are going to start getting perhaps stupider or not as intelligent as it comes to the information they have access to. And you're already starting to see some websites turn off the ability to have Google's bots and GPT's bots and Cloud's bots be able to scrape their tools and their knowledge as well. So when it comes up to alternatives and things like that, I'm not necessarily trying to say that the AI agentic search is terrible and it's the worst thing that's ever happened, but it does mean that particularly for people growing up in this age, it's going to have to be a lot harder to search through where are you actually getting your sources from, because we're going to things more like agentic AI search. Now, when it comes back to traditional search engines, of course, Bing, we can skip right over that. Doesn't really matter. The thing to understand about Brave and DuckDuckGo is that these search engines themselves are already built on search indexes like Bing and like Google. For instance, some users already use Start Page. But the thing about Start Page is Start Page uses Google as an index. And DuckDuckGo, I believe, uses Bing as an index. And what a search index is effectively kind of like back in the day, you used to have phone books where you could run through and see what all the addresses and people's names are and what their telephone numbers were. Same kind of deal, but because that this is where this web address points to, this is where this web address points to, and we have scraped the internet to be able to find a lot of different backlinks to be able to find your information. And this is particularly part of the reason why some of these search engines are getting worse as time goes on, because there's only about 2 major players in the search engine index. Now, there is another search engine that does exist called Kaji. They have developed their own search index. I've been using Kaji for a couple of years now. This is not paid. Now, Kaji is a paid service, so you are paying for the search engine. And I've been a pretty big fan of it personally, but then again, not everyone wants to pay for a search engine. But even if you're not paying for a search engine, you're still paying for it just in the ads that you're being served irregardless. So there are all some alternatives that do exist online out there, but it depends on where things are going. And realistically, like a lot of these things, you're probably going to end up finding that you're going to be searching through a couple different sources as well. You'll end up going through Google, you end up going through Gemini AI, you'll end up going through Cloud, you'll end up going through ChatGPT, you'll end up going through Kaji, and you'll search through a couple different sources. So I'm curious on your thoughts on this overall. Have you been noticing that other people are starting to offload a lot of their thinking in your personal life to things like ChatGPT? I know that I've been getting interactions from some people that I know, and it's pretty clear that the messages they're sending me are even all ChatGPT based or even Gemini based as responses. So it feels like you're not even talking to a real human being through a message, even though you're actually talking to apparently a human being as they're searching things through. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and I'm curious what you've been using as search engines as time goes by.